Alexander. Sometimes that is all that needs to be said. Alexander the Great. Perhaps the mightiest military commander of all time. Certainly the most successful general in human history, who took the Greeks from a competing series of warring city-states to being the most powerful and dominant empire the world had ever known up to that point. The Greeks dominated the ancient world. Their culture, art, pottery, religion, mythology, and history, even their coinage, their clothing, all of it became dominant throughout the entire world. Their mythologies were the stuff of legend, usually syncretic with the local customs and religions of the areas that Alexander had conquered, and also copycatted by the Romans who sought to emulate him. While their philosophy, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the teacher of Alexander, were all proliferated all around the world. The reason for this mystique and this power and this dominance, culturally, politically, economically, and socially, was due especially to Alexander and his wide-ranging conquest, his Hellenization, in which the Hellenic Greek culture was spread all over the world and became the envy of the entire globe. Nation after nation sought to emulate Alexander, and his success at such a young age has become the stuff of legend, while his death and the division and crumbling of his empire have been quite sad. When Alexander started life, he was not Greek. He was considered a Macedonian barbarian to the north of Thessaly, and it was his father, Philip II, an expert military and political tactician, who had maximized and perfected the phalanx style of fighting that had become the scourge of most of the Greeks. He employed Aristotle, the great philosopher, to teach his young son, well, through his military prowess and cunning, he managed to put to the heel all the other Greek city-states. The once mighty Sparta and Athens had been crumbling due to the Peloponnesian War, and the Corinthine League and the Thessalians had all sworn allegiance to Philip of Macedon, the northern barbarian, one of the most powerful rising stars in the ancient world. Before he was assassinated suddenly in 336, leaving his 20-year-old son with a heart full of ambition and a mind full of Aristotle's teachings, to take this small yet powerful kingdom in the northern part of Greece to conquer the whole world. Alexander had such ambitions. His stories amongst his soldiers have also become extraordinarily legendary and as popular as the ancient Greek myths which he so heartily believed in. Alexander once gave away all of his things to his soldiers, and the reason he did so, when somebody asked, was what did he have left? Well, his hopes of world domination and conquest. Alexander hungered for battle. He thrived on warfare, and he mobilized the greatest fighting force the world had ever seen, the hoplite phalanx, to his advantage. Carrying long spears, 18 feet long, hoplite shields, and short swords, these helmeted soldiers, along with the cavalry and the expert military tactics that Alexander had learned from Aristotle and others, became the scourge of the Near East. Alexander's forces moved at breakneck speed to conquer as much of the world as they could, and all the while, he built up the morale and courage of his men by suffering with them. Once, when water was brought to him as they stumbled through the desert and thirsted, Alexander poured it over. Another time, when a soldier was brought freezing to death into camp in the cold dead of winter in the lonely mountains, Alexander stepped aside, abdicating his place at the fire so the soldier would not die. But amazing as these stories were, and as their repertoire and Alexander's legacy grew, the best example, perhaps, of Alexander's incredible cunning, savvy, and brilliance is yet another mythical one, the Gordian knot. In the city of Phrygia, while he was conquering Asia Minor, he heard of a knot whose untire would be the king of all Asia. Alexander went in. Seeing the complex knot that so many had struggled with, Alexander took out his sword and cut the knot open, breaking the rules, yet solving the mystery, and he would indeed become the king of Asia. He relied on the phalanx and his hoplites to win. The phalanx was all of those hoplite soldiers bunched together in a marching line, and as great and brilliant as this was, and as good as it was in open combat, he still needed to conquer cities and destroy heavy artillery and cavalry. For instance, when he besieged Tyre, he built a causeway halfway through to the island city, and used that to besiege his enemies, eventually causing the city to fall. Alexander's conquests were swift. He moved from Anatolia into the Levant, into Egypt, and then back up towards Persia to face his greatest rival. The Achaemenid Persian Empire had long been the bane of Greek existence. It had etched itself traumatically into the Greek psyche with the defeat and annihilation of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae a century and a half before. The Immortals were an extremely powerful shock force, and while they were no match for the Greek phalanx, they had been extraordinarily powerful. Their vast resources and large armies were quite intimidating. Yet Darius III, their emperor, feared Alexander. He feared a united Greek force, with all of its resources and manpower, and he had right to fear. For in 331, 5 years after his father had been assassinated and he had taken over, moving at a breakneck speed, Alexander crushed the Persian army at the Battle of Gaugamela, his most famous victory. With a much smaller force, the Persian initial attack was offered a counter, the counteroffensive of the phalanx, which destroyed it. Alexander was victorious. The Persian threat would soon dissipate, and he wept, for he had no more lands to conquer. And conquer, he decided to continue, moving eastward as much as he possibly could, taking more and more land as Greek culture spread throughout the entire world. It was ironic that the man they considered a barbarian, Alexander, had become such a Hellenic man that he insisted that the art and language, the philosophy taught to him by Aristotle, the myths of Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon would be spread among the world, as Greek became the lingua franca. Greek art and culture mixed with the local customs of the people. And all over the place, Alexander built cities, mostly named after him, most notably Alexandria in Egypt, with its famous library. A man of culture, sophistication, and understanding about politics, philosophy, and writing, still itched to conquer and move eastward. And ever eastward did he move, towards the lands of Bactria in modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, his victories there cementing his empire as the largest of the ancient world. Soon after, however, Alexander would be stopped, not by his new enemies, the Mauryan Indians with their literal elephantine forces, but by his own men, strung out, running out of resources, and homesick beyond belief. Alexander's men mutinied and forced him to return home. He had been a ruler for 13 years and had spent the vast majority of that fighting. It was on the way back, on the way home, that he died, perhaps of a drunken orgy, of which was common with him, perhaps of syphilis, or perhaps of tuberculosis. It is one of the great mysteries, the death of such a great conqueror. And his empire, long and strong, would not be passed to his son, but be divided by his 4 generals who were ambitious, but not nearly as ambitious as he had been. This maintained Greek customs and language and philosophy and religion all throughout the ancient world, as the ancient world thrived on the Greek-speaking languages, coinage, and economics. It would soon become the envy of the other rising kingdoms. Julius Caesar coveted Alexander's power, and while the Roman Empire gained far more land than Alexander ever could, it took far longer to do so. Another emperor, much later on, Napoleon, also envied Alexander, also saw himself walking in the footsteps of the great commander. And while Napoleon certainly was gifted and perhaps the greatest general ever, he was not undefeated. Alexander was merely undefeated, and his empire was the stuff of legend. Alexander had many great qualities to him as a person, in addition to his military tactics and ability to conquer. However, he was never a great king or leader and did not spend much time ruling. However, you cannot fault him when you understand that he was busy building an empire the world would never forget. I hope you enjoyed this story about Alexander the Great. If you enjoy history, then you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing. I release long-form videos every Friday and Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I am always live Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays for Q&As and live stream lectures. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. Check out all the short-form content too, and remember, love history.